D&D Creative Sim creation. Basically, I take my D&D characters that I have come up with, gave them backstories and all that stuff, and even drew them out, as you should be seeing probably right about now, actually, and tried to turn them into Sims. So with the drawing, it is a drawing that I have created based on what I imagine the character obviously to look like, and I'm using the drawing as like a inspiration for the sim as closely as I can. Obviously something like a drawn character out of my imagination, there's almost no way that I can 100% get a sim to look exactly like that, because you're limited on hairstyles and clothes options, and when it comes to fantasy worlds like D&D and stuff, you're limited on like things that make a race that particular race. Like my Dragonborn, I was able to find a dragon tail, and that was basically it. And technically Dragonborns aren't even supposed to have tails, but if I didn't decide to include a tail on my Dragonborn, his sim version definitely wouldn't have had any remnants of a dragon. So, yeah. Anyway, but in today's episode is one of the few characters I think I mentioned, I don't remember whose I mentioned it in, but I was talking about how most of the characters, even though, you know, depending on the race that you choose, depends on their age. Like, elves, they live, like, a really, really long time, so, like, 120-some-year-old elf technically has, like, the maturity level of, like, a 20-year-old human, so on and so forth. So, obviously, like, their ages are technically all over the place, but what I tried to do for most of them, most of my characters are in between, if you were to translate them into just plain human years, they are actually in, like, the same age range from, like, 18 to, like, 35-ish, I would say. That's, like, my average, but I do have a few outliers, and this is actually one of them. So this is Leif Matsuo, and he is a human. Obviously, you could tell he's more elderly. On the Sims version, you could see that I have made him a vampire. In realistic terms, he's definitely not a vampire in D&D lore, and technically what he is does exist in previous iterations of Sims, at least Sims 3 I know of for sure. I don't actually know if Sims 2 had them. But he is a version of a werewolf, but mine, as you could probably have noticed in the drawing, is a were-tiger. So in D&D there are were-tigers, there's werewolves, were-tigers, there was a few other ones that were like official ones, and then I think there's some that people have just sort of came up with over time as like homebrew things, but he is a were-tiger. He is basically an old man. I know the way that it goes is like, if you were born with I guess it's technically a disease or whatever, the were disease. we'll just go with that. I'm forgetting like its actual terms for D&D. I think it's similar to like real life, like it's a curse or a disease or something like that. But and technically I think in certain situations it can be potentially cured, but again it depends on how it happened. So you can be born this way, or you can be turned into one. I think if you're turned into one, that's the one that can potentially be cured, but that's also something that should be left to the player if they want to allow it, because, you know, maybe they've fleshed this character out completely thinking about them never not being a were creature. But I think technically there's a potential you can, but if you're born, I don't think it's as easy, maybe they both can be cured, I don't know. Anyway, I'm pretty sure that most people don't actually cure it because it's just part of the character, so, you know, they don't actually try to cure it. Unless, like, that's their whole, like, reason for traveling around is to try to find a cure. Who knows? Anyway, if you were born with it, you're supposed to have better control over it, so, like, you can actually choose when you turn and stuff like that. Versus if you were turned at some point in your life after you were born, you actually do not have control over it at all. I would prefer him, particularly, to be somewhere in between. If I had to choose one or the other, I would want him to have more control over it, so him being born with it. But if I did get a chance to ever play him myself, or like if I DM'd and I made a world, I would make it so that if technically your mother was turned while pregnant with you, like you're somewhere in between, there's like certain situations where you can't control the turn, but then otherwise you usually can control it, but you know. Anyway, that's sort of where I would technically want him to be. Like, he has control over it, but not completely. So something like that, because I still like that element of, like, not having full control. Like, there's something that triggers it, whether it is the moon or something else that triggers the turn that he cannot help. I want that to be an element. I want that to be, like, an unexpected element, but I want him to also be able to have some control over it so that, you know, in situations where he really needs to be the were-tiger form, he can turn into it, because otherwise he's just an elderly old man who's drunk all the time. Yes, he is a very drunk old man. If you've ever watched Inuyasha, Moroku's, like, mentor, the guy who, like, he raised him basically after what happened to his dad, I want him to be somewhat like him, but obviously, one, he's a were-tiger, and two, he actually goes out traveling. Like, he's not quite as lazy as that, but he will just fall asleep and stuff when he wants to, and he constantly drinks all the time. In fact, his, like, main source of, like, his main, like, weapon, if he ever uses it, is technically his cane, and a weapon, and a flask. So, it has, like, a little thing to hold his drink in there. But yeah, so... But as you could probably tell by now, why I chose to give him, like, the vampire form is just so that I could try to represent that he can turn into the tiger. In Sims, if there was a werewolf thing, obviously I would use that, even though I don't know... Obviously, since we don't have it, we don't know exactly how it works, so I don't know how much freedom I would have had to try to make it look more tiger-like instead of wolf-like. But I still would have went with it over the vampire, just because it's more fitting for what he actually is in the D&D world. But, you know, oh well, this is the best I could get right now, and giving him cat ears and a tiger tail. It was sort of strange that I had to make, like, his... Like, when it comes to the vampire form, you actually can change quite a bit about them and not change their regular form. So, like, the size of his head, I made it a little bit bigger because... Obviously, tigers have a bigger head. And, like, as you could tell in my drawing, his old man form is quite a bit shorter. I actually drew him shorter than I meant to compared to his tiger form. So I have, like, had, like, a little arrow with a line to show, like, his true height compared to his tiger form. But he's still shorter than his tiger form. And, like, tigers, they just have really ginormous heads when you really, like, see them and stuff like that. Honestly, most big cats do, except for, like, cheetahs and stuff. I made his head a little bit bigger. I had to make him, one of the things that you can't change is, like, their muscle and fat ratio when it comes to their body. So, whatever it is in one form, it will be the same in the other form. So I had to make the old man very muscular, but luckily with the outfit that he has, you can't tell, because I don't want his old man form to seem like he actually is that strong or muscular. I think if it really came down to it, he could at least try to defend himself enough time for someone to help him. But not nearly as much as he could do if he was in his tiger form. But since his tiger form technically only, well, at least in D&D, he only wears like a loincloth thing. You see the muscles, so I wanted the muscles to be there. Obviously, I'm making him wear shorts in The Sims because, one, it was the easiest, like, transition to a loincloth versus for Sims World. Because obviously I don't have loincloths. I don't even know if I've ever seen loincloths. But I don't really know if I want him wearing a loincloth in this version of Sims, because he still looks somewhat like an old man, even in his supposed tiger form here. So I don't know if I really want that. Anyway, probably would have still chose to stick with the shorts. But, you know, it's trying to get the point across. Now, I did obviously mention that he is a human were-tiger. I did not mention his class or his subclass. He is a monk. So, monks tend to fight with their fists and stuff like that, and they're more hand combat related. Certain monks especially can have weapons and stuff. Like, it's not weird for them to actually have a weapon. But his subclass is way of the drunken master, because, you know, he's drunk all the time. That's just how he is. He's always drunk. Like, this guy is just always, there's almost never a time when he's not drunk. If he's not drunk, something's wrong. And as far as, like, his goals in life, he doesn't necessarily have big, giant goals. He basically just wants to live life and drink. That is, like, his main thing. But, him being, like, a were-tiger and stuff like that, and him constantly being drunk, he sort of is put as an outcast from a lot of communities and stuff like that. Like, they don't tend to associate with him and all that stuff. So, he tends to be a loner a bit. Not by choosing, but, you know, they just thought he was strange. And they didn't really care to be around him. So, obviously, that is why the lovely group of Drex, Shamira, Amara, and Taman actually embraced his unique weirdness self of being a elderly, drunken man that can turn into a tiger. A very muscular tiger. So they were perfectly okay with him joining along, and, you know, they take in the fact that he is an old man. I imagine that, again, with Amara, I want her to be, like, she's very tiny, but I imagine she's actually strong, so, you know, I could easily see Amara and Drax, like, trying to carry this old man every once in a while, just so that he doesn't have to walk around, if he's not in his tiger form anyway. I feel like if he's in his tiger form, he's fine. Now, as far as the sim version of him, I did give him the aspiration of Master Mixologist. Obviously, he likes drinking. He also has the traits of hot-headed, foodie, cat lover, freegan, and erratic. Now, that is the 5 traits, or if I can have that certain mod working when I go to put them into the big, giant D&D mansion that I'm creating alongside this Create a Sim series. Definitely go check that out. There is a link down in the description below to the playlist, so you can see the mansion being built as well that I will be putting them in. It's going to be like a little mini series that's almost handled like a reality thing. Like, I won't be controlling them much, just seeing how things naturally play out. I am putting a little D&D spin on it, which I think I mentioned in the build of the mansion, so I won't go into depth in here, but there is like a little D&D twist on there. But if I can't get that mod to work for the traits, his main ones are going to be foodie, hot-headed, and erratic. The cat lover and freegan trait are just because, like, one, he turns into a were-tiger, but he's old man, he lives off the land, he's like, whatever. But hot-headed because the fact that he is a were-tiger, I just imagine that's one of the things I could say, like, you know, when he gets angry, maybe that's one of his triggers to turn into the were-tiger. Foodie, just to go along with, like, the drinking, like, I eat at the same time I'm drinking, and I want drinks at the same time. Drinks all the time. And erratic, just because, partially because he's a were-tiger, so, but he's also a crazy, drunken old man. So, yeah. Anyway, so that is Leif. I hope you enjoyed this Create a Sim video and like how Leif turned out. If so, let me know down in the comments below. Make sure you hit that lovely like button, subscribe if you're not already, so that you don't miss out on the future D&D characters, as well as eventually seeing them in the little mini-series to see what in the world happens when I put them all in the same household. Let me know who is your favorite character so far. Definitely would be interested to know. Leif is like the 15th character, I believe. 15 out of like 30 some, I think, is how many I'm putting into this house. Thank you, MCC, for allowing me to put several Sims into one household. Otherwise, this mini-series that I am doing would not be allowed to happen. But anyway, definitely would like to know who's your favorite so far. Interested to see if you keep commenting along the way to see if any of them change as time goes on. Maybe you really like Fee, but now you sort of really like Shamira, or, you know, maybe later on the line you'll like a new one. I have some pretty interesting ones coming up, I believe. So hopefully you enjoy their videos and like how they are as well. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll hopefully see you in the next one. But until then, bye bye!